Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Negotiation Tips and Techniques digital event. My name is Michael Bolt, and I am the Events Delivery Manager at CMI, and I'll shortly be handing over to our speaker today, David McLaughlin. If you have any questions during this digital event, you can ask them using the live chat box on the right-hand side of your screen. And we will answer as many questions as we can during the Q&A. Today's session is being recorded and will be shared with you later today for those of you who have booked to attend. The event recording will also be available on the CMI website and the CMI YouTube channel. So now over to David to begin today's event.
Brilliant. Thank you, Michael. And thank you, everybody, for joining us this morning. I'd like to take about 45 minutes of your time, if that's okay. I'm not going to get into a negotiation with you about that because we can't speak to each other. However, what I want to talk about is negotiation is part of everything we do. Negotiation, the dictionary definition of a negotiation, it takes place between two or more people when differing views come together to attempt to reach agreement on an issue. It is persuasive communication or bargaining. Now that's the literal definition of it, but it's so much more than that because it's something that we do all the time. Somebody says to you, do you want a drink? Would you like tea or coffee? We're into a negotiation. So everything we do is negotiation. And negotiation is about getting the best possible deal in the best possible way. But we have to have something that we want in it, and we have to have something that we value in it. It's no good just negotiating for the sake of it. Otherwise, we all become philosophers and just discuss and discuss and discuss and nothing gets done. So we have to think about this from two sides, really. Why are we negotiating? What are we hoping to get out of it? But also recognizing that nearly every interaction we have with people can be described as a negotiation of sorts. Now, before we get into the meat of negotiation, I want to talk about the types of negotiation we're going to come across, the types of people that are involved in negotiations, and then some tips and tricks on how we can best get the best results possible from a negotiation. It's really important to remember that nothing should be taken for granted and never take anything that isn't freely given. And this includes people's time. So for me, if you want to negotiate with people, first thing you need to do is negotiate the time. Can I have half an hour of your time? Can I have an hour of your time? Can we set aside a day where we can talk about X, Y, and Z? Is the start of a negotiation. So we need to thinking about the other person, the other people that are involved, thinking about what they can and want to bring to the discussion, think about what we bring to the discussion, what everybody's likely to take away. So there's some basic principles before we start out. Now, one of the really important questions we need to ask ourselves is, should I negotiate? Am I in a place to negotiate? Should the negotiation take place now? Am I the best person to do it? Or do I need to get somebody else involved to negotiate on my behalf? Now, this is really important because when we think about where we're coming from in a negotiation, we really find it difficult sometimes to put our feelings aside. And if we start to negotiate from a point of high emotion, we're not necessarily likely to get the result that we want. So we have to think about the issue here, rather like when we talk about difficult conversations, we need to think about the issue and not the emotions around it. So we first need to ask ourselves, how am I feeling about this negotiation? Is this something I can go into? Am I feeling in the right space to do this? Or am I coming at this from a point of anger? Am I coming at this from a point of weakness? Or indeed, am I coming at this from a point of power and strength? And how is that going to affect the negotiation process as we go through that difficult discussion? We need to think about culture. Is the culture right for negotiation? Are we operating in a culture where negotiation takes place? Or are we operating in a culture where negotiation is a challenge and is really quite alien and not something we do very often? And this will depend on where you are in the world as well. If we think about where I'm coming from at the moment in the UK, negotiation is not something that happens on a regular basis. Some of us, like myself, will go into shops and say, I want to buy something. Is this the best price? Some of us that are older will think about things like, can you do a better price for cash? All of those kinds of things start off those negotiation processes, sorry. When I go and buy a car, for example, I have a car that comes on a 3-year plan. So when I go and buy a car, the first thing I say to the salesman, who we have a relationship now because we've done this several times, is make this easy for me to say yes. That's my output. That's my first stance for the negotiation. You know I want to do this. I want to do this, but you need to make it easy for me to say yes. This isn't just a given. So we're going to have a bit of a negotiation there. So there's a culture in that particular environment. Now, there are other environments where it's very much an expectation. If you go to certain places in the world and you offer to pay the first price that's set on the table, you will offend people because the culture is, I say this, you say that, we meet somewhere in the middle. So we have to think very carefully about where we are and whether the culture is accepting or disagreeing with the negotiation process. Think about that. Think about where you are in the world. Think about the organization you're in. Is it very didactic? Is it very dictatorial? Or is it open to negotiation? Think about why you're having the negotiation as well. Think about the costs and the benefits. It's all very well having a negotiation, getting into it, thinking this is what I want. This is what I'm going to do because I've stuck on this now. This is the figure I'm going to pay without any factual evidence around that at all. But I'm going to go to war over this because I can and because I want to. Think about, is that actually going to provide you with any benefits against the cost of doing that? And the costs may be just time. The costs may be that you alienate people in that process. You upset the culture. You offend people unintentionally, but because we've not thought about the culture, we've not thought about our feelings, coming at this potentially from a position of anger. So we have to think about all these things all the time. Have I got the time to do this? Is now the right time to do this? Am I the best person to do this, or should I get somebody else in? Is somebody else much more effective and efficient at negotiating than I ever will be? Because it's not something I'm comfortable with, going back to those feelings. It's not something that I'm used to, thinking about the culture. And I'm really not very good at it because I give in too easy. Because really, I'm not that invested in the process. I don't potentially care. So we have to think about those things as well. We think about coming at a negotiation from an ethical point of view. So I'm going to talk about this a bit more as we go through this morning. But thinking about the ethics is really important. And one way I like to think about this is, if I do this, have I got to yes, or have I dominated the whole situation? And do I feel comfortable with it? How does that feel as a gut feeling for me? What am I going to feel like if my family and friends find out about this? Would I justify my actions if they ended up on the front page of the local newspaper, for example? Is that something that I'd be comfortable and confident to do? Think about what our goal is from the negotiation. What am I trying to achieve here, and why? Goes back to that culture, goes back to that costs and benefits. Am I just doing this to dominate you because I can? Or is there a real benefit here for both of us? And we need to think about win-win. This isn't just a battle here. We need to get to yes for everybody, and we need to make that getting to yes as comfortable as possible. So there's some important questions we should ask ourselves before we even start to engage in a negotiation. And then when we think about the types of negotiation we might get involved in, we've got a number of different types of negotiation that can happen. We've got what we call distributive negotiations, where there's a win-lose, I win, you lose, or vice versa. We have integrative negotiations where we both win, and these are the most positive types, because we both want to leave the table feeling like we've gone away with more than we came with, or at least the same amount that we came with, and we've not lost. So we think about that. We think about the benefits of a win-win. Will include the ability to do this again. We can do this again if everybody seems to win. Any negotiation that we arrive at, any deal that we arrive at, is likely to be more successful, is likely to stick better if we both win. Now, we need to think about this carefully. I'm going to talk about win-win a little bit more as we go through, because we don't want to trade off things that are really, really important to us. We can think about negotiating in terms of a deal. We might buy a car, we might buy a house, we might be buying a stereo, or whatever it might be, that we can think about that deal. And I've made a saving, so I've won. You've still sold it to me at a price that you're comfortable with, so you've won. So we have a win-win here. We're much more likely to deal with each other again if that's the situation. Now, we also enter into negotiation, especially as managers, often for dispute resolution. And this is a really challenging one. And this is one where we really need to think about our feelings. Have we taken a side? Have we got an unconscious bias here that we've already adopted and we're already sticking to a position and we're trying to get it round to our way of thinking? Are we going into a dispute resolution thinking the sooner this is done, the better, and I will push towards a settlement that happens quickly so I can get out of this uncomfortable situation? So again, this is where we would need to think, am I the right person to be entering into this negotiation? Or do I need to get somebody in who can do it better, more efficiently, more fairly for me because I'm too emotionally involved in this? So we go back to those original questions. Should I be negotiating? Is it me? Is it someone else? What's the best way to proceed with this? When we think about how we're influencing others as well within a negotiation, we need to think about where we're coming from. And one of the things I like to think about here is the 3 Ps. What is our position? Are we holding the power? Are we talking to power? What is our perspective on this? Where is our empathy? Can we empathize with the people that we're negotiating with? Do we have any understanding of what they're going through in terms of a dispute resolution, in terms of a deal, in terms of the situation and the culture and all the things that we've talked about so far? And are we looking at problems? So are we looking for solutions, or are we looking at propositions here? Are we looking at, say, this is an idea I've had, what do you think about this? So we're almost pitching an idea in a negotiation. So we may be thinking about coming at this from different perspectives. Now, if we're coming at this from a position of power, we need to be very careful that we are still negotiating and not domineering and not being dictatorial. You do what I say or you get out. It's not a negotiation. And if we come from that stance, we're very quickly going to lose people. We'll get more turnover in our teams. We'll get more turnover in our organizations. We're likely to get complaints registered. We're likely to get people just doing what we ask them to do without thinking about it, without engaging in it, without improving the way that they do things, because we're dominating that position. So we need to think about that as well. And in terms of the power, we need to think about the longer term effects of that. If we get this wrong now, if we're seen to be too domineering, if we're seen to be somebody you can't negotiate with, that has a very long effect and a very negative effect. So we need to consider that as well. And in doing that, we need to remember that negotiation isn't about a battle. It's not I win, you lose, I won, you do as you're told, or you get out. That's not negotiation, and that's not where we're coming from when we're talking about these things. And we've mentioned ethics, but we need to think about ethics when we're thinking about our position. Are we taking an ethical position? Are we acting ethically? Will we be happy if we get to the solution that we want to? Will we be happy at the way we've got there? How will that be seen? Will we be seen by others as an ethical negotiator, or will we be seen as a bully? Because it's a very fine line that we have to tread there, but it's one that's really important to focus on. So I want to talk now about some different types of people that you're likely to come across in negotiations. And it's really, really important to try and understand the people that you're negotiating with, because it will affect the length and the style of the negotiation that we're having. So there's a few main types I want to talk about. So we've got feelers, people who want to take into account small talk. What did you do at the weekend? We'll have those questions, those bits of chat before we get into the meat of the discussion. We can't come in and say, right, this is what we want from our side, because we'll scare them off. So we need to think, okay, allow time for that. I think this negotiation is going to take an hour. So I need an hour and a half in my diary to do this, because the first bits will be taken up with, what did you do at the weekend? How are your grandchildren? What are you planning for your holidays? All those kinds of things. Did you see what happened on Netflix last night? Whatever it might be, we need to allow that time for small talk. People want to feel they're having a relationship with us. They're feeling from a different place. They're taking into account all those things that Maya Angelou talks about, when she says, people won't remember what you said, they won't remember what you did, but they'll remember the way you made them feel. Feelers want to be listened to. They want to let you know that you're listening. They want to listen to you, and they want to feel that there's an engagement going on here. So we need to make time and allow for that. We have sensors. Sensors can be strong, decisive, results-oriented people. This is what we're going to talk about. This is what I want to get out of this discussion. Let's crack on. I'm not here to waste time. Focused on the discussion. I want to get this done. We've got half an hour. If we need to be finished, close this discussion down in 30 minutes time. We're not about wasting time. I don't care what you did at the weekend. This is the issue we're going to talk about. Let's get on and talk about it. Let's look at the pros and cons. What are the pros and cons of this discussion? If we do this, what's going to happen? If we do that, what's going to happen? Where's the best position to be? So we need to be more focused with these people. We're not worried about what happens with our grandchildren, our weekend, what we watched on television last night, who our favourite band is, how the football team are doing. None of that. We just get straight on with the business. And we have thinkers. Now, a lot of people would call me a thinker, so I'm very aware of how this one works. We need to think about being logical, being organised. What are the facts? What's the logic behind this? Why are you coming to that decision? Tell me about the details of this. What are the pros and cons? I don't want to be disorganised. I want us to think about this clearly. And then we may drift off and compare and use stories to tell each other about how we got to this. We can look at the facts. We can say, well, that's not a logical decision to make. Why are you going down that way? But also, there's a level of caution here. So we've talked about A. Let's talk about B. Let's now go away and think about this. We're going to talk about all the details. And then let's come back tomorrow when we've had a chance to consider, to chew this over, and come back to the table with a clear idea of where we want to go and what our decision is going to be. So we need to think about people like these as well. Now, if you're one or the other of these, it's really important you have empathy with the different styles of thinking, the different styles of negotiating. And we can also think about transactional analysis here as well. Are we coming at this from a parent, an adult, or a child stance? So we need to think about all of these things when we're getting into negotiations. And the last one I want to talk about is the intuitor. Intuitors are enthusiastic and creative, but they see the bigger picture. So I'm looking at how this is going to make a difference in the future. How is this going to fit in with everything else I'm doing? Does this fit in with everything else I'm doing, or do I need some more information here? But they can get very, very vague and very large focused. So sometimes we need to bring people back, help them to stay on the agenda, help them to focus on what it is we're there to talk about without drifting off too much. So think about who you're dealing with, try and understand the other side, get to know them, get to understand where they're coming from, recognize where you're coming from, because all of these things will help very greatly in the discussion process. And one really important thing, whoever we're dealing with, we need to avoid thinking of them as the other, because this isn't a battle. And if we start thinking about people as the other, we can very easily lose respect for them. We can become very, I'm going to win, and if I don't win, then if I win, you lose. If you win, I lose. We need to stop thinking about that, because we don't win if they lose. It's not how it works. It's not a zero-sum game. And it's very easy to make some assumptions about people that we really need to leave at the door before we start having a negotiation, and approach this with a really open mind. And we need to think about, how do we feel about the people that we're negotiating with? Is that affecting the way we're going to enter this discussion? What are their feelings about us? What do they know about us? Do we understand what their politics are? And are we letting that get in the way? We very often see negotiations or playground fights in Parliament, where they're ideologically opposed to each other, and that very much affects the negotiation and the discussion. And when we're entering a negotiation, we need to leave these things behind. So it's good to understand people's politics, but not let that get in the way if it's different from ours. We need to think about any associations people may have now, tribal associations, group associations, any kind of association that we think about, we can think of as tribal. And it's very easy to get into a battle on that basis, because they then become the enemy in the discussion rather than our aides in the discussion, and helping us and help them to get to an agreed settlement that we can all go away from the table feeling happy about. We need to think about our desired outcome and what their desired outcome may be, but not to anchor and fix on that, because they may come to the table with a very different outcome that actually turns out to be better than the one we were hoping for in the first place. And if we get fixed on a desired outcome and we anchor on that, we can get into trouble and we can get ourselves a less of a result than we anticipated in the first place. And we also need to be very careful of the ladder of inference. Now, when we're thinking about the ladder of inference, this is a very simple way of explaining this would be to say, your boss says, can you come and see me on Monday morning? And he tells you this on Friday lunchtime. I want to see you 9 o'clock on Monday morning. And then we build up this massive story in our head. We look at our reality and our facts. We select facts from that pile that meet our narrative. So he wants to see me on Monday morning. So clearly I'm in trouble. Clearly he's going to sack me. He's got some terrible news for me. That's the fact. I've taken that. That now becomes my reality. I've interpreted that as reality. I've made those assumptions. He's going to sack me. He's going to tell me I've done something wrong. I'm going to get a warning. I'm going to get demoted. Something terrible is going to happen. So I've made those assumptions. I'm now going to make some conclusions based on that. Right, he's going to say this. I'm going to say that. If he says that, I'm going to say that. He absolutely hates me. That's my belief now. So my action is I walk in there on a Monday morning and rather than listen to what he's got to say, I'm going to go, take your job. You know what to do with it. Here's my resignation. And all of that has happened because I've traveled that ladder of inference without stopping, thinking, all the things we've talked about so far. How do I feel about this? What's the goal here? What could he possibly be talking about? Why could he possibly want to see me at 9 o'clock on a Monday morning? In reality, he's going to promote me. He's going to give me a new job and a pay rise. But I've not looked at that because wherever there's a gap, we think it's all gone very wrong and all gone very negative. So be aware of and try to avoid climbing that ladder of inference when you enter into a negotiation, because it will very much flavor and color the way we approach that negotiation. Be very careful of stories that you tell yourself. So some key messages before we move on to some tips and techniques to look at as well. Remember to respect the people that you're in negotiation with and have respect for all parties involved, and be sure to show that respect as well. Listen, actively listen, empathize where you can, look at ways that you can both win. Everybody can walk away at any time they want to, not just you. Anyone can walk away from the negotiation. So if you disrespect them, they're likely to walk away from the negotiation. People aren't forced to be there. They don't have to talk to us. They don't have to negotiate with us. We're not the only ones that's going to have an alternative to a negotiated outcome. So respect that as well. People do what they want to do, and we have no control over that. We only have control over the way we approach them. How they react is a very different matter. So think about how we're doing this. Are we being ethical? Are we being empathetic? Are we clear about why we're having the negotiation, what we want to achieve from it? And remember that it's not a zero-sum game. It's a win-win. The pie is bigger than you think, and we can always look at ways to expand that. So let's move on to that now. We are telling stories to people, and we're listening to people's stories, and they have a different version of the story than we do. Very much, this comes to the fore very much in terms of a dispute resolution, for example. An easy way to think about this is to think about a car accident. If you have a minor shunt with somebody in a car, hardly anybody ever gets out of the car and goes, "It was my fault, I'm sorry, I didn't see you." People will always say, "You were going too fast, you came around the corner too quickly, it was my turn, you should have given way." The other side will say, "No, I was in the right place, you should have given way, you were going too fast, you didn't follow the lanes, you didn't look at the signs," whatever it might be. Everybody has a very different picture of the story that we're looking at. A witness will come along and say, "No, that isn't what happened at all. What happened was a dog dashed across the road, neither of you saw it, but something else happened to make you collide. So it's nobody's fault, it's somebody else's fault completely." So you get a very different story on this, and we have to be prepared to listen to other people's stories and be very careful of the stories that we're telling ourselves, because the more we tell ourselves stories, the more we believe that that's the case, and very often it isn't. So we need to be very careful about what we're saying to ourselves. We need to find out what the other side is looking for, if we can, before we enter that. Is that something we can agree to? Is that something that we need to discuss further? Why do they want that? And do they have the authority to make decisions, to agree to decisions at the negotiation? And do I have the authority to agree to negotiations and agree to decisions that are made? Or am I going to have to listen to what people are saying, go away, talk to other people, come back with an answer? So we need to be very clear about these things before we start the negotiation process. We need to think about what our walkaway point is. What is our BATNA, as we say, our best alternative to negotiated agreement? What is our walkaway point? At what point are we going to say, no, that's it, this is not going to happen. I'm happy to pay this, but no more. I'm happy to go this far, but no more. If that's where we get to, what's the next step? Now, if you're selling, be unique about what you're selling. If you're selling an idea or selling a product, and have lots of other potential customers so that you can walk away. So if I'm selling my house to you and you're the only person that wants to buy it, I'm kind of stuck. You then have the power. So if you're buying, you can walk away. If you're selling, you also need to be able to walk away by saying, do you know what? That's the price you want to pay. That's fine. You're not going to get it from me. I'm going to move now. I'm going to stop trying to sell this to you because you're upsetting me, you're offending me, you're disrespecting me. What you want to pay is nowhere near the cost that it's going to cost me to actually produce this and sell it to you. So I can't do that. And we need to be careful that we don't turn into, if we're selling, if we're producing stuff, we need to be careful that we don't turn into what I call a martini organization. We do anything for anybody, anytime, anywhere, at any price, because we're desperate. So we need to think we're not desperate here. We have a freedom of choice. We have freedom to negotiate. What is our best alternative? There are other people that we can deal with all the time that aren't going to, take us for granted like this and take the mickey out of us. It's really important that we think about the negotiation and is it limited? Is there a fixed negotiation here? And don't assume that every negotiation is fixed, because we can trade alternatives. We can bring things into the negotiation that weren't there initially. We can bring things in that will add value, that will help the negotiation go, and we can trade things that we want. Is there something else that we have to give? Is there something else that we want that may not be initially on the table for that initial part of that negotiation? So we need to think about how we can bring things in to sweeten the pot and what we can take away. It's about that relationship, and wherever you can, we need to get to know the people that we're dealing with. Who are we dealing with, what they think, all those things I mentioned earlier. And these are really important when we're going through the steps of the negotiation. What is their walkaway point? Do we understand what that is? Are we going to offend them? Are we going to get to a point where they say, no, that's it, I can go no further on this? So we need to build that interest for both of us, build the interest that we get a deal that's appropriate to both of us. And understand that when the deal needs to be conditionally agreed, that's when we can move on to the finer detail. So if I can do this for you today, is that something you'll be interested in? If we can get the price right, very old selling technique. If we can get the price right, is that something you'd be happy to go forward with? So we don't think about bundling it on everybody to start with. Where are we going in steps here? How are we going to get to the outcome that everybody's happy with? And is there any interest in the outcome? Are we interested in it? Are they interested in it? Or are we talking to the wrong people? Now, one of the things we need to do is to think about where we start necessarily isn't where we're going to finish. So if we're thinking about selling stuff, we can aim high. If we're thinking about buying stuff, we want to aim low. I want to get this as cheap as possible. Neither place will be the end, is likely to be where we end up. Now, this is the same in dispute resolution as well. If we think about a dispute and we think about the outcomes that are available to us, we can think about where we start isn't necessarily going to be where we finish. We need to allow flexibility for that, and we need to allow room for that to happen. If we're in a negotiation with people and we're selling stuff or we're buying stuff, we need to make sure that the right side goes first. And we need to try and avoid anchoring wherever we can. So if we go into a negotiation to buy something, for example, and we say, I think I'm going to buy this, and the price that seems relevant to me is £750. I don't know where that came from. I don't know where that figure has any theory behind it. It's just a figure that has come into my mind and I feel happy with it. Now, if somebody says the cost of this is £1,000, I'm going to go, no, I don't want to pay that. You're not going to get that from me because I've already anchored on £750. I don't know where this £750 come from. It's an unconscious bias. I've just thought £750 seems reasonable on the basis sometimes that 20 years ago when I did this, that's how much it was. If somebody comes along to us and says, right, I'll do it for £500, we can say, yeah, that's great. I've got a bargain there. But actually, what's involved in that? What is the true cost of that? What's the true value of that? If they're going to do a job for us, is it going to be anywhere near as good as the £1,000 job? And why do we think that's cheap and we think the other one is expensive? Because we've anchored on this mythical figure that we've given ourselves that has no basis in fact at all sometimes. And this is the same with dispute resolution as well. If we're dealing with our teams, what I want is for you two to agree, be friends and play nicely. Is that ever likely to happen? And what is the cost of forcing that argument through? What is the value of that? Do they ever play nicely? Are they going to be productive if they play nicely? So we need to think about these things in a little bit more detail. What are we aiming to get out of this? Now, we talked about this not being a fixed sum, and we have to think about concessions. But if we give concessions and we make concessions, we need to trade them. We don't want to give them away for nothing. Nobody values something that you give them for free. There has to be a reason why we do it. There has to be a benefit for it. And reciprocity really does work. If I give you something, you're more likely to give me something, and vice versa. So we have to think about these things. Don't think about a fixed pie. This is not set in stone. We can always trade concessions, but don't just give them away because they have no value. Again, an old sales technique. If you give people stuff for free, so what? It's free. Well, you give it to me for free, you give it to everybody for free. If I believe I'm getting something that's worth something that has a value, but you're trading it with me, then I'm more likely to go along with what you say, and the negotiation is more likely to be successful on all sides. We need to keep the whole picture in mind, and we need to be aware of the details, but we don't want to get lost in the details. There's a wonderful video, several different versions of this on YouTube, where you can watch people playing basketball. And the instructions for this are you're told to watch the ball and count how many times the ball bounces. And in the middle of that, a man dressed in a gorilla suit walks through the basketball court. And very, very few people notice them because literally their eyes on the ball rather than taken off the ball, and they're not seeing what's happening in the background. So we need to remember, what's the whole cost of this? What's the whole picture going to look like? If we win this negotiation, everybody's happy with this negotiation. What does that do to the wider picture? What are the knock-on effects here? What are the unintended consequences of getting to this solution? So we need to think about these things all the time as we go through this. Now, at this point, I'm just going to stop and say this may seem very, very complicated, but it isn't. This is something we do on a regular basis unconsciously without thinking about it. So we take those skills that we've learned, those abilities, all those things that we do every day, and we put them into a specific situation. Sometimes it can become challenging, it can become difficult. But if we go through these steps and we think about all these issues, we're much more likely to have a good negotiation with people. Now, one thing that's really important to remember is that I keep talking about the issues here. It's really important when you're going into negotiation to remember what the issues are. You're negotiating the issue, not negotiating necessarily with the personality. If we don't like the people we're negotiating with, that should not get in the way of us having a successful negotiation if we focus on the issue. What is the issue that we're trying to resolve? What is the situation that we want to engage in? What is the outcome that we want, irrespective of the personalities of the people that we're dealing with? And we can't ignore that altogether, but don't go into a negotiation thinking this is going to be terrible because I really don't like this person. I really don't get on with them for whatever reason. They just are not a nice person for me. For everybody else, they might be a fantastic person, but chalk and vinegar, we just do not get on. If that's the case, and that's really going to affect the negotiation, you can't get past that, that's the time to say, do I need somebody else to do this negotiation for me? Is it better if I bring in a third party that we're both happy to talk to? So we need to think about those things. We need to look for variables. We need to think about what variables we can have, what's good for us, what's good for them. How do we get to that win-win where everybody can say yes to the outcome? of what's happening here. The one very important thing here is to keep lots of notes. We can have these discussions, but always follow them up to clarify what you've said. If this happens face-to-face or if this happens over this kind of media, it doesn't matter. I would always follow up with an email and say, it was great to speak to you. This is what we appear to have agreed from my side. Are you happy that that's the same from your side? Are we agreed that this is the outcome we've come to? This is the solution we've come to. And before you go any further, get that in writing, get that agreed. Then we can, if necessary, contractualize that and make that a fixed thing that we can all agree to, that we can come back to in the future if there's any conflict, and we can say, look, this is how we agreed we would deal with the conflict. This is what we agreed to do. This has now caused a conflict, and the conflict becomes the issue, not you've caused a conflict, you've done this, you've done that. We have a conflict. How are we going to resolve that issue? We're going to go back into negotiation. We're going to renegotiate around the issue, not the people involved. We need to take time to reflect when we negotiate as well. And this comes back to the point I was saying about ethics and how does it feel gut-wise? How would your family feel about this? And think about what went well in the negotiation. What did I do well? What didn't go so well? And what did I do that wasn't so good? What could I have done differently? What would I do differently again next time? Now, sometimes, let's be honest, we get to this point and we think, I am never going to negotiate with this person again. That really did not go well. I wouldn't get into that. I am never going to touch this again. If this comes up again, I've got two choices. Either I give in to everything they want to say, or I get somebody else in to negotiate for me. And that's fine, but we need to have that time to reflect on that and answer these questions for yourself as honestly as possible. We're not always the best people to get involved with this. How did it make me feel? Think about those ethical questions that we took. What would my family and friends say? What would I feel like if this was front page news tomorrow? A good framework for people is really important, and find a framework that works for you. Some people I love stories. I love stories and I love telling stories, but you do have to be careful of the stories that you tell yourself, because they can be very, very powerful. And the stories you tell other people can be very powerful as well. One framework for looking at this is Covey's framework of 7 habits of effective people. Think about the things that you're going to do here. Put first things first, start with the end in mind. What are you trying to achieve? How proactive can I be in that? And keep revisiting the skills that you've got. And one final thing I want to talk to you, show you and share with you is we've talked about selling quite a bit and producing stuff and selling things here and buying things. But I think it's really important to remember this. There are 3 kinds of products and there are 3 kinds of service, and we can have things good, we can have them cheap, and we can have them fast, but we can only choose 2. You can't have all 3. So you can have it good and cheap, but it won't be fast. Have it fast and good, but it won't be cheap. Or you can have it cheap and fast, but it won't be good. Think about what you want. Think about what the outcome is. Think about where you want to get to in that negotiation. Think about the people you're dealing with. Remember to respect them. Respect yourself. Think about all the things we've talked about today. And I'm sure when you get into negotiation, you have a much more successful outcome. So that's the input from me for today. I hope that's been useful, and I hope I've made good use of your time in terms of negotiating that time that we asked for at the beginning. I'm going to hand back to Michael now in the studio, because I think we might have some questions from people.
Indeed, we do. Thank you so much, David, and that has been extremely helpful and insightful. I'm sure our audience would agree with me. So we've got 3 questions that have been pre-submitted that we'd like us to cover, or you to answer this morning. And the first question comes from Hazel. And Hazel asks, do you have any tips on how to quickly overcome unconscious bias in negotiations?
This is a really good question, Hazel, and it's a really challenging question, because by its very nature, unconscious bias is something that we're not aware of, obviously. And I think this comes back to stopping before we go into a negotiation, asking ourselves, checking in with ourselves, do we have any unconscious bias? Have we decided that the people, that the other parties that we're negotiating with are coming from a weaker point of view? Have we decided they're coming from a stronger point of view? Do we know what their associations are? Have we made assumptions based on their associations that they're not going to agree with us, they're not going to do this, they're just here looking for a fight because ideologically or whatever reason they're they come from an opposing position that we do, so they're never going to agree with us. So we go into that discussion feeling that it's not going to come out well in the first place. So the unconscious bias one is an interesting one. We have to stop and think, go through that checklist of unconscious bias. Have I anchored on an outcome? Am I making assumptions about the people that I'm dealing with based on whatever reasons that may be? Whatever difference we have between us, is that going to colour the discussion? Have I made a bias on the fact that I'm more intellectual, more powerful, less intellectual, less powerful, less well-educated, more better educated, whatever it might be? Think about those things, just check in with ourselves, go through that quick checklist. Am I going into this with a genuinely open heart and an open mind to see how we can both come out of this feeling this has been a successful process for both of us? If you're not aware of it, you're not going to do it. So I would always say, run through that little checklist, have a checklist in your head. What are my biases? And am I leaving those at the door when I go in? And we'll all have different ones, of course.
Of course. Great. Thank you so much, David. And the next question comes from Giraj. How do you negotiate with a boss who is not listening to constructive arguments and only wants to hear his or her answer?
This is a good question as well. Thank you, Giraj. This is a really good one, and one that happens quite a lot, I think. It's that power dynamic. And I think it's about initially understanding that and about recognizing that where they're trying to get to. And it's about keep coming back to the issue. This is an example of taking the person out of it and coming back to the issue. So I would potentially say, for example, Michael, I understand that that's your point of view. I understand that that's what you want to hear. But are there different alternatives that we might want to discuss as well? Are there different options here that we might want to consider? When we've considered them, of course, we might come back to your preferred option, but let's just have a look at these and see if those options can add any value. It's almost, some people will say this is like pandering and playing up to, but sometimes that's what you have to do. Sometimes when you recognize the people on the other side of the table, as it were, and you understand where they're coming from, you understand their biases, you understand what they're trying to achieve, it's about the most effective way of discussing that is often about the issue, not that person. So we can have that conversation about the issue, and wherever possible, we take the people out of it. So I understand where you're coming from. You're very passionate about this. You're very negative about this, but that's having no effect on the issue. The issue is, how are we going to save money, for example? How are we going to cut X amount of money off the budget? I understand you really don't want to, but this is something that we can't get away from. We're going to have to do this. So how can we best agree on the issue, first of all? How we're going to deal with the issue. Now, this will automatically involve more time. This isn't going to be a quick negotiation. This isn't going to be a quick process, and it may be multiple visits over this issue until we get this done. Don't expect, if you've got a situation like this, don't expect to happen in one go. Don't expect to happen in one day. We're going to have to discuss things, put things on the table. Sometimes the first part of the negotiation is coming to a point where we both agree over what we're negotiating, if that makes sense. So there's almost a pre-negotiation about the negotiation. What are we going to be talking about? I think we're going to be talking about this. Well, that's one perspective. Here's another perspective. Here's another perspective. How do we agree on where we're starting, what the starting point is, what the issue is, and then we can go forward from there. It does add a level of complexity, which requires time and resource. So we need to be prepared for that.
Great. Thank you, David. And our final pre-submitted question comes from Ietope. How do you correct a situation where you have earlier had a poor negotiation and you want to renegotiate?
This is an interesting one as well. Thank you for this. I think, first of all, we would need to think about, why was it a poor negotiation? Was it something we did? Did we get into a battle? Was it a win-lose situation? If we recognize that it's been a poor negotiation, this is where the issue changes. So the issue is, this is what we agreed. However, this is no longer working for me. So what I would like to do is negotiate another option, another alternative. So it's almost saying that this negotiation is done. We put that to one side. Can we live with that? We'll try it out. Can we live with it? No, we can't live with that. So we need to negotiate now. And it's almost not a renegotiation because we're not revisiting the same issue. That negotiation has resulted in an unintended consequence that we now need to negotiate the unintended consequence. Can we go back now and say, this is different. This is not what we first negotiated. And now we need to negotiate this as well. And it's that continuous process of negotiating the issue rather than going back and saying, I was wrong, you were wrong, I didn't get what I wanted. Okay, you didn't get what you wanted, but that you should have been a better negotiator. You didn't get what you wanted. What's the consequence of that? Let's now talk about the consequence and deal with the issue, which is the consequence. Again, it brings in a level of complexity, but rather than try and revisit what's the issue today.
Thank you,
Hopefully
David.
that helps.
Very insightful. Thank you. We do have some live questions that have come in. We do have some time, so I'm hoping we can just get your thoughts on some of these questions that are coming in as we speak. So let's look at a question here from Karen. And the question is, I am a feeler negotiator, but often have to deliver as a sensor, which I struggle a bit with. Any tips?
This is good. This is a good question, Karen. And this is really about understanding yourself and understanding the other people and trying to recognize where those people might be coming from in terms of where they are. Two feelers in a negotiation is not necessarily going to provide the best outcome. So we need different levels of grit, if you like, to get a polished outcome. So where that came from, but I think you know what I mean. So if you are you're having to act as a sensor, ask yourself, why am I having to deliver as a sensor? Why can't I deliver as a feeler? What is it that's missing if I deliver as a feeler? What's being lost from negotiation? What's being added as a value if I deliver as a sensor? And can I learn to do that? And if not, then you need to negotiate with the people that are asking you to negotiate, potentially, to say, am I the best person to do this? Should somebody else undertake this negotiation? I can help in the background. I can help us get to where we want to be, but maybe I'm not the best person to lead the negotiation. Maybe I'm not the best person to lead the discussions. So think about what you bring to the table. And if you're coming as a feeler or an intuitor or whatever, but you're being asked to deliver as a sensor, what's missing? Where would being yourself more, being more authentic about yourself, bring more value to that negotiation?
Great. Thank you, David. And we have another question here. Well, more of a statement. Let's look at this. It amounts to how good one is at horse trading. Would you agree?
Bottom line, probably yes. Yes, I would. Yeah. That's a very basic way of putting it, but I guess, bottom line is that's what it's all about, isn't it?
Great. Thank you, David. And a question here from Aggie, hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. How to approach a negotiation on the second contract when a discount, for example, was granted for the first contract only? This is
again, I think this relates to the law of unintended consequences. We've agreed something, we have to live with that and own it. That produces a consequence, and it's that consequence that we need to then negotiate. So if you are negotiating a contract, and as you say, the first one has a discount on it, you probably want some kind of a sundown clause in there, which says, this discount is definitely and only for the first contract, and this discount will cease and desist or as of the 31st of the month or whatever it might be. Any subsequent contract that we have will be at this new price. And there is the benefit of that is you got to try before you buy fully. So we're negotiating those tradings. You perhaps weren't confident when we first agreed this contract, so we gave you a sweetener in order that you could try it before you buy it. You've now had that opportunity. So moving forward, this is going to be this price, which we agreed during the first contract that this would be the only price. The first contract would be at this price. You've had all those opportunities now. If you want to go forward, this is the price. If you don't, fine. Have that BATNA, have that walk away point where you can do that. Now, there is a risk when you give stuff away too early. This is what I was talking about really when you give away rather than trade concessions. If you give them the discount without being very clear about it, having that sundowner clause in there, then it will, the implication is that you will always do that. So you have to be very careful when you're doing that initial contract, those initial negotiations. This is what we can do. This is why we're doing this, to offer you a chance to try our service, to try our product. We know you'll be confident with it as we go forward, but in order for you to do this, we're going to give you a bit of a discount now. And it's about getting that negotiated straight away. If you come to the second point, second contract, and they don't want to do that, then you're negotiating the issue. That's gone. The first contract is gone. It's done. The deadline is over. Let's negotiate again from there. Now, at that point, you may be in a position to continue the discount. You may not. But it really, that's the issue that you're dealing with then. But they're two separate contracts, two separate issues, two separate negotiations.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, David. And we are going to draw it to a close there. But thank you all for your contributions and for being with us today. And of course, thank you, David, for your insight and expertise and enlightening us today. Don't forget, if you are a member of CMI, you can log into Management Direct using the link in the live chat, and you can find a wide range of exclusive and practical development resources and much more. If you are not yet a member or a subscriber, you can join our community via the link that's also in the live chat to gain full access to our Management Direct portal. You can also sign up to the free CMI newsletter for the latest trends and tips for managers and leaders. We would appreciate it if you could take a few moments just to let us know your thoughts on today's event by completing the evaluation form, and the link is also in the chat. So again, thanks once again for joining us, and we do hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you, David.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.